Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, February 23rd of 2021, where two laypersons, a pastor, and an academician gather for about 55 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary for the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is February 28th. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. For our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team's working to be faithful to Lectionary Year B, and we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's how it works. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some questions. That leadoff this week is Sara Mickelson. And then this virtual discussion room, we share, encourage, and challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Sara Mickelson.
Bill Hall.
Charles Willard.
And I'm Don Upton. And Sara Mickelson has some questions for us and is going to do the gospel reading. Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And I hope everyone is as well. We're glad to have you. And we're in Mark. It's Year B. And we are in the 8th chapter, verses 31 through 38. And we have just gone through questioning of who do people say that I am, and Peter has responded with his particular announcement, and we are continuing down that path walking, and here's where we start our scripture in verse 31. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Oof. There's a lot there. So, Charles, do you have anything to add? No? We'll bump right into the questions.
Just a brief observation that to remind the readers and the listeners and the watchers that the way that the lectionary reading for Lent, in order to accommodate the time that we have between Christmas and Lent, to get all these things together, it doesn't follow an even path. And that means that sometimes where we were last week was just behind where we are this week, but other times we bounce around. And if we don't stop to recognize that we are bouncing instead of watching something straight through, we're getting something that has a particular message at a particular time, then we're going to lose some of the particularity that message is there for us. For example, today we're in the 8th chapter of Mark. Last week we were in the 1st chapter of Mark, and next week we're going to be in the 3rd and the 2nd chapter of John. So it bounces around that way, and I'm simply encouraging people to look and see sort of not only what it is, but where it is in the gospel. And there's something very unique, which we'll come to later, about the positioning of these things by Mark.
Thank you, Charles. That's really helpful, because we want to see things sequentially, and that's not how this story goes in this particular time and place. So question number 1 starts with verse 31. And in verse 31, the word must is used. There is something about must undergo great suffering and in accordance with God's purpose and design. This presentation of unwavering priority away from human desires and toward the purposes of God is sometimes hard news to hear. Christ's truth is the truth, even when Peter and we can hardly bear it. Can you recall any moments of discovery or epiphany when you encountered God's truth and at the same time uncovered a conflict within yourself, the church, or a community? I didn't really let people know where I was going and who I was going to ask this question of first. So if you feel like this one is your question and you want to answer it, please volunteer.
I'll begin, if I may. Not that it's my question. I will say that I'll reflect this in some of my comments about the other questions. But what, to me, is the message of this larger journey is that it is just that. It is a journey with twists and turns. The disciples followed Jesus. Peter, as you reminded us, acknowledged publicly that he believed Jesus was the Messiah. But almost immediately, it is clear that Peter really doesn't understand what he just said. He does not understand. And to me, Jesus is drawing them further on a journey. Now, that's by way of introduction. Your question is a personal one. Can I recall a time of discovery or epiphany and dealing with conflict within myself and the church or community? Two quick stories, one personal, one corporate. I grew up in the 50s in the South, finished high school at the end of that decade and entered college. Looking back, until I got to college and became a history major, I never questioned segregation. It wasn't talked about that much. It was just assumed. I worked in the shipping department at Sears, and right outside my department where was the white water fountain and the language then colored water fountain, the white bathrooms for men and women, the colored bathrooms. When I look back, I wonder, why did it never occur to me to wonder about that? I just accepted it. And when I began to study history, and particularly slavery, and when I began to sense and resist with everything in me a sense of call to be a minister, and began to read Scripture, this is a rather dramatic way to put it, almost like I got a new pair of glasses. And it is clear this nation has not arrived on the issue of racism. I have not arrived. But there was a turning upside down of my world. Now, college tended to make my head spin in other ways, too, because of questioning and challenging and all of that was at times disorienting, but for my good. So, yes, Sarah, that whole coming up against the reality of slavery and Jim Crow was, again, I don't want to sound melodramatic. It really was an overturning of my view of the world and my place in it. A corporate example, years later, soon after the AIDS crisis started in America, I was serving senior pastor of a church in Bradenton. It was a newly organized church. We had our first building, and you may remember in those early days, AIDS was a death sentence. People died from it. And I was approached by a group of Christian professionals, psychiatrists, counselors, social workers, who were donating their time and wanting to start a support group for persons with AIDS. Unbeknownst to me, they had been told no by 25 churches or so. I passed it to our mission committee. Mission Committee recommended we open our doors to this support group led by these professionals. There was some struggle on the session. We approved it. And the next Sunday, I naively stood in the pulpit at both services and announced that. I cannot exaggerate the firestorm that occurred. I was unprepared for the anger of some people. But in the process, I and that congregation wrestling with our own internal conflict about, as some people put it, do we really want those kind of people in our building? And in the process, with appropriate regard, I was invited to minister to some of those people, and the church was able to minister. But it really was a radical turning. And it was like, it says Jesus rebuked Peter that, he must undergo this suffering, be rejected, rise again. And I love that verse 32. He said all this quite openly. It's right there in your face. And eventually I was grateful for that overturning of all of our expectations, but it was difficult to live through. Now, I acknowledge, Sarah, and I don't think you're suggesting that what I'm saying is directly an overlay onto this passage. It is my overlay onto this, or my inference from it. And I really thank you for the question.
Thank you. Don, do you want to bring anything to the table?
I'm intrigued by Peter's confidence right before this passage. He's affirmed. He gets it right. I choose to believe that in his heart he got it right, and he's fully confident in it, and Christ is confident in saying, you got it. You got it. And at the same time, Peter is able to engage in the most extreme evasion throughout the rest of the book. Those go hand in hand. And I think what I learned later in life than I wish, that those two things are together. There is not this, you don't go to one end or the other. I'm a human being. My capacity to evade and take action and to harm is running right alongside with my confidence. And so it's this examination of what is it to follow? What is it to follow? Not follow my heart, but follow. So for me, I think I like what Bill said. I think what I've learned is everybody's putting on new glasses all the time. They're trying them on. It's like, oh, I'm going to look at my heart. Oh, okay, that'll do. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm going to have to look at it again. And it's painful. And it goes hand in hand that I can be evasive and I can harm people on one day and then work in full confidence. So how do I meditate on being a follower of the way? To understand who Jesus is rather than trying to understand who I am. And I learn about myself through who Jesus is. And I've got just 3 counterpoints that I've written down that guides me through even my business. And I'm not saying I have this right. I'm saying this is the conflict of my life based on your question. But one is the call to see others, which we see in Mark, since we're in year B in Mark. And the other is the desire to exclude out of fear or to outcast people. And I don't mean that in extreme ways. I mean that every day with a word, with an unanswered call, that those go hand in hand all the time. One is to help and to serve, and the other is to affirm what is good, quotation marks. My job to affirm what is good is in conflict with my helping and seeking and listening, because I'd be confident, and so I become exclusive. And the third one is seeking justice. We're asked to seek justice. In Mark, we're seeking justice. And then the conflict is having the confidence of a fact pattern, having the confidence that I'm right, having confidence my church is right, having confidence that my family is right. I believe that that's life, that I'm not going to be able to swing to that the first one. I'm always going to be caught in those. And what it requires for me is friendship, my demonstrating friendship by listening, and entering the day in a prayerful manner to make sure I listen, which I fail in every hour. And then to not be afraid of the discovery that's going to take place. So I would say, for me, reflecting on those moments, and I think about adolescence where many of us have to take these things on. I left the church because it was all of a sudden these bursts of revelations that I was actually in a community that would say I would not be able to engage in friendships in a way that would allow me to look at the left side, help and serve and see others and seek justice, that there was an exclusiveness about it. And that, for me, would apply to women leading in the church, me working for women. I mean, it's things today that sound crazy to me, and I have to dwell on those. Matters of sexuality, the LGBTQ community, which is a deep circle friendship around me. That there's a point where you feel that pain, but the pain is okay. That if you feel the pain, if you feel the conflict, if you feel a loss of trust, if you're leaning towards loyalty, if I'm leaning towards loyalty instead of seeing, then this may continue to be a painful road. And what I need in those situations are friends. And that means I'm called to be a friend. That we try and need glasses. I just love the glasses thing you said, Bill. It's like this is all the time for people. We just don't feel comfortable talking about that with each other. And that's where the Christian loves come in. So I'm raising this not as an answer. I'm raising up my failures when I say this. And that the more I lean into it, the more interesting it gets, and the more the deep my friendships get. But it's painful. It's painful. So that's my start.
You know, I was grateful for the article that Charles sent from Walter Wink, the essay about how we are so enculturated with our own perspectives or the perspectives of those around us that God has to occasionally break through those perspectives to draw our heart closer to His. I can think of social upheaval and reform that have come slowly and through the loss of life, whether it's the South African apartheid review, reform, and potential healing. If it's the response after we discovered the atrocities that took place in Germany in World War II and how Europe and Germany specifically had to heal, and we had to heal. We had to let Germany be something other than that. And I think about, I grew up, Bill, close to when you grew up. I was born in 1962 and came through that period of time afterward where supposedly things were working toward equality. And it almost only appeared as if they were working toward equality. It seemed like the social system was still, from both sides of that coin, very much entrenched in what they knew and what felt safe and what was not threatening to the other side, as well as it was to sustain power, the systems that were built around the repression of people who had skin tones that were different from mine. And I think about how we're still trying to find our way through that, and how patient God must be to wait for us to stop and put our heads together and put our glasses on, so to speak, or even get fitted for glasses for the first time, to have a comprehensive relationship where we are receptive to being, if you will, walked alongside and shifted left or right into the correct path. The perfect analogy of this is I have a dog now, and my poor pup was diagnosed with diabetes back in December and has, in the last 45 days, lost his sight completely. We have a swimming pool in the backyard that doesn't have a fence around it. It used to when the kids were little, and we were strangely worried about them falling in the pool. But now you can't let the dog out in the backyard without going with him, because he will walk into the pool and not even realize that's what he's done. So I think about how hard it is for me to steer a small 25-pound dog for safety away from that which seems to draw him every time we go out. Of course, it might be my fear and anxiety, but I think about how difficult it must be for God to wait for us to look to Him when we are completely blind and completely wrong-headed sometimes in ways that are destructive to His purposes and will. And I think that's why the conversation between Jesus and Peter is so sharp and so strong, is because Peter has this notion of Messiah that he can't let go of. And it's going to be counter to the purposes of God if he goes out and cuts off an ear of somebody, let's say. So I've spent a lot of time this week thinking about when was I paying attention and when did I get it wrong? So, Charles, do you have anything to add? I can't hear you.
You're doing fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So, my second question looks at verses 32 and 33, and this is Peter's rebuke of Jesus and Jesus' rebuke of Peter. And in our faith walk, we seem to be on a sliding scale, moving with tension between what is our human nature and who God designed or who God has in mind for us through divine purpose. And the choices of humanity laid alongside and over against the will and purposes of God might look something like choosing to ask for help rather than hard-headedly endeavoring without it, with a sense of pride. An object in motion, staying in motion rather than choosing to rest. Or an object at rest, choosing to become in motion rather than staying at rest. Maybe the path of least resistance finds the road less traveled. Yeah, I spent some time looking at that poem this week. Thank you. Nature, in almost every instance, has a design in it that says conserve energy, do the least amount of thing you got to do to get what you need, and take the easier path. And I was struck by how bubbles join and create shapes. And they do this in an effort to conserve the amount of energy it takes to sustain the bubble, the sphere. So they share sides. And the more bubbles you blow, the more sides are shared, and it gives the bubble longer life. Unfortunately, it gives it more gravity-affected weight as well. But it was interesting to me to see how that science lifted up this idea of how we as creatures by design look for the biggest outcome for the smallest amount of investment of energy and time. So when we look at this question, my question is actually this: what are your thoughts about, as Christ followers, that we have to overcome our nature, or even the path of least resistance, to arrive at that moment where we're most in concert with God's will? And I think, as we move along this sliding scale between human nature and God's purposes with tension, how do we have to make choices that will bring us closer to the purposes of God's will? And what are your thoughts about that as the Christian journey? Charles, you got anything for me?
Not yet. No, not yet. I said I wasn't muted.
I love it. Don, you want to throw anything in the mix?
Yeah, I like journey. I think it's all the time. It's not one thing or the other. It's all the time, because the base nature. In this situation, I always have to turn on myself because I don't know the hearts of other people, and so it would be evasion, mostly evasion. I think everything from evading being outcast, not being able to have the utility of making a living, not being accepted. I think common things that I may share with other people, and I think evasion. I think the light went on for me as an adolescent when I realized that the evasions, for some people, I have white privilege. I'm not as exposed to the harm, but I'm still out there evading. There was actually direct violence. The threat of violence, not just violence to your economic opportunity, violence to your aspirations, violence done to your status. I mean, all that's out there. But I mean, real violence was possible and witnessed for people that were not in conformity based on some kind of standard. And so this is just kind of hovering out there for me. But what I've learned, just to be personal about it, what I've learned is if you're a follower of the way, as a follower of the way, I'm supposed to expect surprises every day and not evade those. And don't be, I am not supposed to be confused between the surprise and something that's dangerous. The world is filled with great surprises, and I need to be open to those things. One is that I have to be able to see my heart more and more often, as painful as that is. And the more I have friendships around me and I'm following the way, that can be a happier journey than it might have been in the past. And it changes every day. And I want to acknowledge today will be filled with changes. And if I spend my time worrying about my changes, I'm not going to be able to help my brothers and sisters with their changes. I'm going to have my head, get my head off my own heart, deal with the change, get my head back up. And that allows me to be an encourager with enthusiasm. I have an enthusiasm for change. And it may sound strange, maybe a little enthusiasm for the pain, the ache, when the evasion goes away and these things have to be explored, because there's a great thing on the other side. There's true friendships, true opportunities to serve, and this pain goes hand in hand with what it means to be a follower of the way. But I didn't want to get through this day without highlighting the word violence. That we all have things that we want to run away from, but I think that's present in many lives. At least witness to it, the potential of economic and physical exclusive violence. And that's painful to talk about as well. But that it could be as simple as someone not wanting to get beat up at school. That's violent. Those are assaults. And coming to terms with that. And what that meant in terms of how I lived and what my friendships were and the follower of the way and what a real friendship is, was a point of real change for me, prayerful change, which actually led to me changing the way I live, the way I work. The business I run today is based on those and some of those recognitions of pain. Thanks, Sarah.
You're welcome. I hear a lot of my own experience in that voice, Don. Thank you. I find that I am making choices each day. And in those making of choices, and I'm in an exercise class, and one of the conversations we have is, instead of making the decision you're going to go out and run, which is a big decision, just choose to put on your shoes. Chances are, if you put your shoes on, you'll at least go for a walk. So my choices need to be smaller and more deliberate, and offer me a movement toward God's purposes and design, even if I can't fathom making that full commitment to going running. But that idea that by simply making the choice of putting on socks and shoes is I'm moving towards something more healthy for me, but also the continual choice to put on shoes is an easier foundation to build from. So I find myself intentionally moving toward the thing that I'm most afraid of to ascertain if my fear is real or imagined, to imagine if I am, if you will, strong enough to move the step forward toward reconciliation and toward doing things that are of God's purposes instead of my own. Bill, do you want to throw anything in?
Yes. First of all, a comment about the Greek text, and I confess I meant this morning to look up the article I found and do my own checking, and I forgot to do that, but so I'm relying on memory. One of the women biblical scholars that I came across says that this phrase, "get behind me, Satan," can be misleading. According to this scholar, Satan doesn't have to mean the personification of total evil. According to her, it could be translated as one who resists, one who impedes, one who interferes. So her thesis is Jesus isn't saying, Peter, you're Satan, as we often hear that, but is identifying Peter as one who resists. And that was helpful to me, and I'm going to trust this person's scholarship at the moment. The base nature. For some years, I was involved in a spiritual renewal movement based on the Roman Catholic Crucio. The particular expression I worked with was called Walk to Emmaus. And there were various points in the weekend. I helped work with the men's weekend. There was a separate women's weekend. One of the moments we called dying moments, in which we, after a time of preparation, about midway through the weekend, we invited each individual, if they wanted to come forward and express what it was about them that they had become aware of that needed to die and be raised again. It was a very, we did not seek to make it some big emotional mountaintop, but it sometimes was. And it was ego or pride or what, there are various things, but that whole idea that's based on Scripture, in order to find a new life, something of the old self has to die. Now, again, you've referenced the Walter Wink article that Charles got for us, and before we started recording, I thanked Charles for this article. It's very powerful. I want to read a couple of quotes from that. He says, "Why open this explosive and shattering book, the Bible, unless we are willing not just to be added to, but subtracted from?" Or elsewhere, is it the case that these disciples do not understand because they would simply try to, and I'll read Wink's language, the disciples would try to force what was being said into the procrustation bed of their old presuppositions. He must be Presbyterian with that kind of vocabulary. Jesus is not just interested in pouring a fresh new content into their heads, but in emptying them of displacing the old presuppositions, of giving them a new mind. Elsewhere, for the secret of Jesus' identity is the kind of secret that stays secret even when paraded openly before people's eyes. You know, Jesus said, "Let them see who have eyes to see." It's out there, but we don't see what's right in front of us. And boy, I think that is so contemporary in our nation and our world. The truth is right there in our face, and some people, and in some way, all of us refuse to see it. And then finally, I wasn't a philosophy major, but I was attracted to Hegel's Thesis, Antithesis, Synthesis. Probably many of you are familiar with that. The thesis is where we are now. The antithesis is my transformation in college. And then synthesis is coming to a new way of orienting ourselves. And as I understand that theory, it just keeps repeating itself. The new synthesis in time becomes the thesis that encounters the antithesis. I'm not equipped to get too deep in the weeds on that theory, but I think I understand that, and I resonate with that constant challenging of what we presume. I really wish I could be alive 100 years from now and hear what we who consider ourselves fairly progressive today are a couple of generations down the road, they'll say, how could those people be so blind? How could they not see? I really believe there is still stuff I'm not seeing, even though I want to see and seek to. So, again, I think it's a very dynamic process that involves being rebuked. That's a harsh word, but rebuked for the sake of dying to self and rising. Christ isn't the only one who rises again. Resurrection can happen in the here and now.
I'm going to quote a famous philosopher, Don Upton. His words for this are wash, rinse, repeat. So, question number, Charles, do you want to throw anything in now?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Question number 3 focuses on verses 34 through 38. These are the most difficult parts for me to hear. And so popular culture and media invite us to craft better versions of ourselves, right? I can use this particular product and it'll make me look younger. I can do this particular thing and it'll make me stronger. So I think one of the challenges we have specifically in American culture is this temptation to build facades that we share with each other. And the self-imagined facade of who we are is often incongruent with the person God has designed. How might these verses liberate us to live into the creature that God has designed? Anybody want to go first?
Well, I'll start with a paradox. I wrote it in my Bible a long time ago, and I don't know who said it, so forgive me. I usually write down who said it. The paradox is I learn who I am by discovering who Jesus is. And what you're raising is the question of, make it personal, how do I become who I want to be? That's the paradox. Or how do I become who you want me to be? Because if I can do that, then I can hide. And if I look in my heart, who do I want to be? Whatever, as long as I am safe, have enough wealth, get rest, feel good, that'll do. And that's not it at all, because those are static, idle things. To be safe, to be healthy, to have resources. There's no active in that. In the book of Mark, it doesn't make any sense at all. The book of INGs, of doing, there's no doing in that. It's just evasion. So there's the paradox. I learn who I am by discovering who Jesus is. And what helps me as you go forward in Mark to 9:37, and just a piece of that verse, whoever receives one child in my name is receiving me. Doesn't say all children, doesn't say all people, doesn't say every day you walk out there's millions of people who need your help. One child, focus. One child is enough. A lot of folks use the term, don't worry about tomorrow, but worry about today. Sometimes that's kind of an excuse. And I think if you consider that, especially with one child, it's a challenge to reflect on every minute, every hour. There's so much to do. It can be such a painful and transformative journey. One day is enough. And if I think about it that way, I don't know if I can. Right now it's 7:11 a.m. Live time in Eastern time. I don't think I can see my way to 5 o'clock if I think this way. And I think that's where the Spirit comes in. Not throwing me into a we talked about that last week, not throwing me into a week of work or a month of work, throwing me into the next hour is about all I can bear. And I think that might be what I'm called to do, to back off and to consider that. So I love the one child. I love the one of it. That I can't give attention to everything. God isn't asking that, but He's asking to be aware of what my neighbor's doing, what's in my field of vision. I strongly believe the Bible says your neighbor is who you can see. Now, maybe a stranger, but it's your field of vision. And what can you do there? And that is hard enough. So I think I'll just say let's look at how Peter's statement to Jesus was sized up 300 years ago, just to make a point that things haven't changed in what we believe. And see if you can hear a parent in this, or a friend, a member of your tribe, a member of your politic, a member of your church. Listen to this. I think it's a wonderful Matthew Henry, 300 years ago, reading what Peter was saying to Jesus. Picture somebody counseling you with their hand on their shoulder, telling you what to do. Here Peter showed more love than discretion, a zeal for Christ and his safety, but not according to knowledge. He took him. He took hold of him, as it were to stop him or hinder him, took him in his arms and embraced him, fell on his neck, the impatient to hear that his dear master should suffer such hard things. Or he took him privately and began to rebuke him. There was not the language of the least authority, but the greatest affection of that jealousy for the welfare of those we love, which is strong as death. The affection for those that we love is strong as death. That was 300 years ago. I wonder if it would have been written the same when St. Augustine, who cared very much about Peter in this conflict, I wonder if he would say the same thing. And I'm not holding this up as something, not attacking those that love us, not attacking ourselves, not attacking myself for loving others, but I think it's counsel to be in the moment, to be present. And I can embrace somebody I love and say, you don't want to go there. You don't want to be different. You don't want to be with them. This is as much about what we say to others than what we do with our own heart. And I feel that burden, and that is painful, that I have to stand back and say, I have some voice with some people. I love some people. What am I going to do with that love? And I think this is just a beautiful story. And the way Henry wrote it was just gorgeous. Love and affection, but his arms around him. He'll come and stay. You are mine. You are my master. It's okay. Let's be safe. Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that really, for me, behind everything that I've seen, including the threat of violence? You can't go there. Don't go there. We need to harm these things so that they're not your lives. And I don't mean, I'm not pointing out any particular theory or fear when I say violence. I just mean it's present whenever we want to put our arms around somebody and say it's okay. Those are my thoughts there.
Wow. Thank you, Don. Charles, did you want to add anything?
I'm trying to think how best to say this. I think my context here in Minnesota is not just an hour difference, and it's not just the fact that it's a lot colder. It is psychologically different, and I'm trying to come to grips with my own, what I'm seeing and how I'm managing what I'm seeing, which is not the way it's ever been before. I mean, when I tell you that I have not been out of this building except one time since the 9th of October, and the way that the life is structured here is not designed to support active interaction among different people. It's designed to enforce social distancing. And that means that the only kind of connection I have outside is this kind of connection. And it's a very, so when I'm asking myself, what am I called to do? It's just I have no parallels in my life to go back to say, well, all right, I can go back to the way that I behaved then, or what that there's nothing back there to be a guide. And so I feel really quite unsure of the best. I see steps forward, but they're really quite different, and they involve making decisions which are not so clear as in the past. I would have always been quite sure of what I needed to do and then proceeded to do it. That's not happening. Very interesting, puzzling, disturbing.
I'm reminded that oftentimes it's safer to slow down before making a right-hand turn. And I found in my life, about 10 years ago, I needed to make a change. I didn't know it at the time, but my whole life needed to slow down for that to happen. And I did not want to slow down. I did not want to take any change, and it was really difficult to experience the change of velocity and the change of direction and the confidence that goes with both of those things. And I think that it's really hard when those things happen to us instead of us electing them. And I don't think that we ever are in that position that we often get to choose. And so I hear that painful place in your voice, Charles. And I'm confident that there's purpose, but I don't know what it is. I can say that with confidence because there was purpose in what happened to me. And I think that there's something about this passage that draws our eye to that and says your confidence about where you think this is going is not exactly where it's going. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It is okay to be afraid of it. It's okay to go, I don't know who to look to for direction, because that means we are slowing down and taking in as much of the information as we can. And I think that Peter is called to do that. And I think Peter's extravagance of confidence erodes to the point of denial. And he emerges after the crucifixion with a totally different mindset. And I think that that's one of the things that happens to us in this purpose, this journey, this way that we're on. And I think that we all get to some point in our lives like that. Or we, if we're lucky, we're getting to some point in our lives like that. So and that's what made me think about these verses and how they can liberate us from that which we think we know into the land of I have no idea, and that I need help. I need to look elsewhere, not just within myself, but elsewhere. So, anybody want to add anything? Bill, you want to go to this one?
Quickly, two kinds of responses, springboarding from your reminder that Peter denied Jesus. So, Jesus says, whoever is ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you when I come in my glory. When I was young and even early in college, and I read this, I thought, well, that doesn't apply to me. I would never deny that I'm a Christian. That's how I took it. But I began to realize there are many ways to deny our faith. If I see someone being bullied and do nothing, I'm denying my faith. If I see people being victims of prejudice and I do nothing, I'm denying my faith. If I don't speak truth to power, that's a kind of denial. It doesn't have to be, insisting. Peter said, I never knew him. Okay, I couldn't imagine myself ever saying that. But particularly on the issue of race, back to my college experience, the first Christmas when I came home, Peter couldn't imagine that either. Right. He insisted he would never do it. Oh my. Anyway, when I come back with all this enlightenment, ready to share it with people, I ran smack up into a wall. I worked back at Sears in the shipping department the 2 weeks I was home for Christmas. The black and white water fountains were still there in the bathrooms. And when I began to share this with family and friends, they thought I was off my rails. And I began to retreat. I thought, I'm home for Christmas, I got to go back and finish the semester and take finals. So there's always that temptation to deny. The other quick thing, and I'll preface it by acknowledging there's a risk in taking modern day concepts and putting them back on Scripture. But I remember what Stephen Covey said in the introduction to 7 Habits. He said, I am not discovering anything new. This is ancient wisdom. I'm expressing it in a different way. After seminary, in which I got absolutely no help in administration and management, etc., and was on my own, early on I was introduced to the so-called SWOT, S-W-O-T, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And I'm hesitant to talk about this with our business management guru, I forget your title for Don. Anyway, our exalted guru. And then another concept of 360 evaluation, where a variety of people help evaluate you. That can be very threatening at times, especially when people identify your weaknesses, okay? But it's interesting, Sarah, the paradox. The more I admit my weaknesses, the stronger I can become. And you're right, it is painful. I had some very difficult moments when people that I loved, and in one case, I chose them to be my team. And when they looked at me and spoke honestly about my strengths and my weaknesses, it was slow to discover that in that honesty, there can be a gift. And I think that's true in our faith. And hopefully, that's what this podcast is about and others, is opening the door. I don't hear any of us saying, I've got the answer. But in some ways, hopefully, we're better at, here are the questions. And because questions open a door. Again, thank you for these questions, Sarah. I'm not done with them.
Well, good. I hope they work on you. I like questions that work on me, so I share them.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And we're out of time. And for folks listening in, Palmacia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. At that site, if you're listening during the time of pandemic, you're in isolation, it's a great place for other discussions of the same Scripture, other points of view. Also reflections, prayer, great sermons, and fantastic music. So we commend that to you. And if you ever want to send us a message, we're at Lectionary Call-In at palmacia.org. That's Lectionary Call-In at palmacia.org. And you're always welcome. And we'll see you next time.